Imagine stepping into a medieval town around the year 1300. The streets are narrow, cobblestoned, and lined with wooden houses that lean against one another like old friends sharing secrets. Smoke curls from chimneys and mingles with the scent of fresh bread, roasting meats, and, if you're unlucky, less pleasant odors from the open sewers. Medieval towns were alive with color and chaos. Merchants shouting their wares, children darting between carts, and beggars lingering near the marketplace hoping for a crust of bread. But behind this lively scene lay a world of food that today might seem strange, even alarming. The medieval diet wasn't just meat and bread. It included a variety of snacks, street foods, and sweet treats that filled a similar role to what we now call junk food. The streets of a medieval city were alive with movement, noise, and smells that modern noses might find both fascinating and alarming. If you wandered through London around the year 1300, you have noticed small wooden cookshops lining the alleys, their smoke curling lazily into the gray sky. Merchants shouted their wares, roasted meats, hot pies, and steaming stews, each one a portable meal for those with little time or means to cook at home. For the urban poor, life was harsh, and meals needed to be fast, filling, and affordable. In this way, medieval cookshops were the equivalent of today's fast food restaurants. A traveler, a craftsman, or a laborer could stop by for a quick bite, eat standing on the street, and then continue with their day. Unlike modern fast food, however, hygiene was not guaranteed. Accounts from the period suggest that cooks often used the cheapest ingredients available, and sometimes that included meat that would make modern health inspectors shudder. One London chronicler, Henry of Huntingdon, wrote in the early 14th century about the bustling markets. The streets are lined with small shops, each offering pies and meat for the hungry, and the rich smell of roasting fills the air. Yet some men whisper that the meat is not always wholesome, for the poor pay little and expect much. Imagine a busy day in the market. Smoke from roasting spits mingled with the sharp smell of vinegar used to preserve meat. In a small cookshop, a pie baker was busy pressing dough around fillings of pork, beef, or offal, sometimes mixed with spices like pepper and cinnamon, which were rare and expensive. The pies were dense, heavy, and surprisingly filling. Interestingly, medieval meat pies were not meant to be pretty. The crust often served as a cooking vessel rather than an edible delicacy. Many people would discard the thick outer pastry, eating only the inside. This contrasts sharply with today's focus on presentation and delicacy, but made sense in a time when convenience and calories mattered more than aesthetics. Beyond pies, cookshops offered pasties, meat stews, and sausages. A pasty, much like a modern handheld pie, was portable and could be eaten while walking or working. A cookshop might even sell small fried fish or battered vegetables, giving workers a quick source of protein. Despite the risks, these fast foods were vital. Urban populations often relied on them because most people did not have kitchens or access to safe cooking spaces at home. For the working poor, eating out or grabbing a pie from a vendor was not just a convenience, it was a necessity. The wealthy also enjoyed quick meals, but theirs were more refined. Aristocrats might send servants to pick up pies from local vendors or prepare elaborate small dishes known as entremets to eat between courses at banquets. Yet even here, the principle was the same: food that could be eaten quickly and with minimal fuss. By the mid-14th century, cookshops had become a staple of medieval urban life. Guild regulations even existed to control what could be sold, ensuring quality, or at least attempting to. The Pork Butchers' Guild of London, for instance, regulated the sale of pork pies, stipulating the weight of meat and the thickness of pastry to protect consumers from fraud. One can picture the scene vividly: a laborer wiping sweat from his brow after a long day at the smithy, reaching into a paper-thin sack for a hot meat pie. Around him, children dart between carts, begging for scraps. A street vendor shouts, offering sausages for a penny, while the smell of roasting fish drifts from another stall. The streets are alive, messy, and fragrant, a chaotic symphony of smells, tastes, and sounds. Even though we might consider this junk food by modern standards, It was essential, practical, and deeply embedded in society. Medieval fast food reflected the rhythms of urban life. Quick sustenance for busy people, a way to stretch limited resources, and an opportunity for social interaction. Eating in the street was normal, communal, and often a lively affair. As we move deeper into the medieval world, we begin to see how these early fast foods influence social patterns, urban culture, and even perceptions of hygiene and class. The humble cookshop was more than a place to eat. It was a social hub, a center of information, and a lifeline for the laboring classes. In medieval Europe, bread was more than just food. It was the very foundation of life. To imagine the daily diet of a medieval person without thinking about bread is like imagining a house without walls. Bread fed kings and peasants alike, and its form and quality often marked the line between wealth and poverty. For the urban poor, bread was often dense, coarse, and made from grains other than wheat, such as rye, barley, or oats. These loaves were dark, heavy, and sometimes mixed with legumes or even acorns during times of famine. One particularly stark example was horse bread, so called because it was originally intended as feed for horses. During years of poor harvests, ordinary people would consume this dense, bitter bread to stave off hunger. Far from being a delicacy, horse bread was a last resort, but it kept the urban poor alive. Meanwhile, the wealthy indulged in fine, white bread made from carefully sifted wheat flour. This bread was lighter, softer, and often shaped into beautiful forms. In some courts, bakers even created decorative breads for feasts, shaping loaves into animals or religious symbols. Bread, in this context, became both sustenance and a status symbol, visible evidence of social hierarchy. Street vendors played an essential role in distributing bread. In cities like London, Paris, and Florence, bakers and bread sellers lined the streets, offering small loaves, slices, or even sweetened bread for passers-by. Children would scramble for crumbs, while laborers bought their daily rations to take home or eat immediately. Bread was often accompanied by cheese, honey, or occasionally fruit, creating a simple yet satisfying meal. In the homes of the poor, bread was a staple of every meal. A typical day might begin with a coarse rye loaf, eaten with some cheese or ale. Lunch could include a slice of bread soaked in broth or used to sop up meat juices. Dinner might feature another portion of bread, often the only substantial food available. The centrality of bread extended beyond mere nutrition. In medieval towns, bread was so important that guilds and regulations existed to control its production and sale. Bakers were required to follow strict guidelines about the size, weight, and ingredients of loaves. Breaking these rules could result in fines or public shaming. The assize of bread and ale, a famous English law dating back to the 13th century, regulated not only bread prices, but also the quality of flour used. Bread also carried religious significance. In Christian Europe, bread symbolized life and divine sustenance, a concept most visible in the ritual of the Eucharist, where bread became the body of Christ. This spiritual dimension reinforced bread's central role in daily life, linking the physical and the sacred. Yet medieval bread was not always pleasant by modern standards. Poor hygiene, contaminated water, and rudimentary milling techniques often produced bread that was coarse, sometimes moldy or gritty. Eating a piece of bread was as much about survival as taste, a fact that underscored the harsh realities of medieval life. Despite its simplicity, bread could also be a canvas for creativity. Bakers experimented with honeyed or spiced loaves, sometimes adding raisins, herbs, or saffron. These variations were more common in wealthier households or festive occasions, offering a glimpse of luxury in an otherwise harsh diet. Street bread sellers, or bakers' hawkers, were important social figures. They were often gossips, news bearers, and witnesses to everyday life. Observing them provides historians with insight into medieval society's rhythms. The patterns of work, leisure, and social interaction, all intertwined with the smell and taste of freshly baked bread. Imagine walking through a medieval market at noon. The aroma of freshly baked loaves mingles with the smell of roasted meat and spices. Children tug at their mother's skirts, begging for a slice sweetened with honey. Laborers pause from work to buy bread, dipping it into a simple vegetable stew. Wealthier citizens might stroll past, selecting a finely sifted white loaf for their household, leaving behind a trail of breadcrumbs as they move. In every corner, bread tells a story of survival, social structure, and community life. Bread also served as a basis for early junk foods. People ate bread fried in fat or soaked in wine, or topped with spices and sugar. These were treats, often consumed in moderation, but they reveal a medieval taste for indulgence not unlike our modern cravings for fast food or snacks. Thus, bread in the medieval world was much more than mere calories. It was a social marker, a religious symbol, a tool for survival, and sometimes even a treat. In every loaf, slice, or crumbled morsel, one can glimpse the rhythms, struggles, and tastes of a long-past society. While bread, meat, and ale formed the backbone of the medieval diet, sweets were the indulgent pleasures that brightened the day. Though sugar was rare and expensive, medieval people still found ways to satisfy their sweet tooth. Honey, fruit, and exotic spices became the building blocks of confections enjoyed by both rich and poor, though in very different forms. Imagine wandering through a market fair in Paris or London during the 14th century. The air is fragrant with the scent of roasted almonds, spiced honey, and baked dough. Small stalls display gingerbread, honey cakes, and sweet pastries, each one carefully crafted to appeal to the eye and the taste buds. Children press their faces against the stalls, watching vendors pull sticky treats from molds, while parents haggle for a small slice to share. Honey was the primary sweetener, replacing sugar for most people. It was used to coat pastries, thicken sauces, and even sweeten bread. Recipes called for combining honey with spices such as cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, which were imported at great expense from the East. The combination of sweet and aromatic flavors created treats that were both luxurious and festive, a sharp contrast to the everyday diet of coarse bread and stews. Gingerbread, now a staple of European holiday tradition, was already popular in medieval times, but it was very different from what we enjoy today. Gingerbread was often molded into shapes of animals, saints, or symbolic figures. These confections were sold at fairs, often accompanied by small prayers or blessings for good luck. In some towns, gingerbread makers became renowned artisans, creating intricate designs that drew crowds and impressed local elites. Another popular sweet was the soft pretzel, often sold in street markets. Pretzels had both culinary and symbolic significance. Their twisted shape was thought to represent arms crossed in prayer, offering protection or blessings to the consumer. They were enjoyed by children and adults alike, providing a quick, portable snack that combined simplicity with cultural meaning. For the wealthy, sweets became elaborate and artistic. In royal courts and noble households, marzipan, sugar-coated fruits, and spice pastries were served as part of elaborate feasts. Marzipan, made from almonds and sugar, could be sculpted into miniature figures of animals, birds, or mythical creatures. These creations were not merely food. They were status symbols, demonstrating wealth, taste, and mastery of culinary art. Interestingly, some sweets were thought to carry magical or protective properties. Honeyed cakes and spiced breads were offered at festivals, religious holidays, and even funerals. Certain shapes, like crosses, circles, or animals, were believed to bring good fortune, protection, or blessings. Eating a sweet was not just pleasure. It was also a ritual act embedded in medieval culture. Street vendors, much like today's candy sellers, played an important social role. They were hubs of gossip and news, their stalls a place for townspeople to gather, talk, and share information while enjoying a sweet treat. For children especially, these confections were highlights of the day, moments of joy in a world often dominated by hard labor, scarcity, and survival. Imagine a child in a busy market clutching a small gingerbread figure, sticky fingers marking their coarse linen clothing. Around them, vendors shout, merchants haggle, and the smell of fresh bread mingles with roasting meats and fragrant spices. Sweet treats were, in a sense, a bright thread of delight woven through the everyday fabric of medieval life. Even among the poor, sweets existed in simpler forms. Small cakes made from flour, honey, and sometimes dried fruits were shared during holidays or local festivals. These treats offered temporary relief from monotony, small rewards for enduring the hardships of daily life. A slice of honey bread, a bit of candied fruit, or a soft pretzel could lift spirits in a way that calories alone could not. Medieval sweets also foreshadow modern indulgences. They were portable, enjoyable, and often consumed outside the home, an early version of snack foods. The combination of taste, symbolism, and accessibility made sweets an enduring part of medieval culture, reflecting human creativity, desire, and social connection. By understanding the sweets of the Middle Ages, we see a society that, despite its hardships, valued pleasure, artistry, and ritual in food. These confections were a reminder that even in times of scarcity, people sought joy and shared it, one sticky, honeyed bite at a time. While sweets brought delight and bread provided sustenance, the streets of medieval towns were alive with the smells and sights of savory snacks. For the urban population, especially the working poor, food needed to be quick, hot, and affordable. Street vendors and taverns provided exactly that, a medieval version of fast food, full of flavor, convenience, and social energy. Picture the bustling streets of 14th century London. Vendors carry trays of sizzling sausages, fried fish, or small meat pies. The air is thick with smoke from roasting spits and the aroma of frying dough. Laborers pause from their work to grab a quick bite. Children dart between stalls, hoping for a scrap. Every corner hums with activity, as hungry townspeople seek something to eat before continuing their daily routines. Sausages were a common snack for both the rich and the poor, though the quality varied widely. Street vendors often used offal, blood, or scraps of meat to fill their sausages. They were spiced with pepper, garlic, and herbs, giving them a robust flavor that could satisfy a hungry worker with just a few bites. Fried fish, often small and inexpensive, offered a cheap source of protein and was particularly popular in coastal towns or along rivers. Taverns, meanwhile, were central to medieval social life. They were more than places to drink ale. They were community hubs where people ate, drank, shared news, and conducted business. Taverns often offered simple fare: bread soaked in broth, small meat pies, or pottage, a thick stew of grains, vegetables, and meat. For workers without kitchens at home, taverns provided both nourishment and a sense of community. Ale was the beverage of choice. Water in medieval towns was often contaminated, making ale a safer option. People of all ages drank weak ale daily, and taverns became natural gathering places for locals to eat, drink, and socialize. Street vendors often specialized in quick, portable foods. Fried dough, small pies, and roasted meats could be eaten while standing, walking, or sitting on a bench. Some vendors even offered items tailored to religious or seasonal events, like spice cakes for festivals or small fish on Fridays when meat was forbidden. Imagine a child in a crowded square, holding a small fried pastry, eyes wide with delight as the smell of roasting pork drifts by. Around them, apprentices rush from workshops, grabbing a quick bite before returning to their duties. A merchant negotiates the price of a small pie, while nearby, a tavern hums with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of wooden mugs. Every bite tells a story of survival, ingenuity, and community. Interestingly, some street snacks were surprisingly sophisticated. Vendors often use herbs and spices to enhance flavors, even on simple foods. A meat pie might include pepper, cloves, or nutmeg. A fried fish could be dusted with herbs. These touches show that flavor and enjoyment were not reserved for the wealthy. Even the poor had access to taste in their daily lives. Taverns also offered social lessons. They were places where disputes could be settled, alliances formed, and news shared. A simple meal, bread, cheese, or a meat pie served as the backdrop for negotiation, storytelling, and community bonding. In this way, food was not just sustenance. It was a central thread in the social fabric of medieval towns. Even in the poorest households, street food influenced daily life. Laborers might buy a small pie or pastry to supplement meager rations. Children might receive a sweet treat during a festival, and travelers passing through a city could find nourishment without needing to cook. Street snacks and tavern fare were accessible, versatile, and essential in urban life. By observing these foods, we gain insight into the medieval worldview, a society that valued practicality, flavor, and communal experiences, even amid scarcity. Street snacks and tavern meals were the lifeblood of the city, sustaining bodies, creating social bonds, and providing comfort in a challenging world. From fried fish to hearty meat pies, from bustling taverns to busy market streets, street snacks and tavern food reveal the creativity, resilience, and social richness of medieval urban life. They were simple yet vital, a medieval parallel to the fast food we know today, providing nourishment, comfort, and even entertainment. While the streets were alive with pies, pastries, and fried fish, the wealthy of medieval Europe indulged in a very different kind of junk food. In the grand halls of castles and noble estates, food was not just sustenance. It was spectacle, status, and entertainment. The elite sought indulgence, novelty, and the thrill of rare ingredients, and their snacks reflected this pursuit. Imagine entering a 14th century banquet hall in Paris or London. The room is vast, with high ceilings, tapestries depicting hunting scenes, and flickering candlelight. Servants glide silently, carrying trays of elaborate small dishes, known as entremets. These were the medieval version of amuse-bouches, served between courses to delight and surprise guests. Some were edible, some purely decorative, and some even mechanical, designed to move or release scented smoke. Entremets could be shaped like birds, animals, or even miniature castles. They were often made from sugar, almonds, or marzipan, and occasionally included spiced meats or fish. Their purpose was not hunger. They were consumed to display wealth, creativity, and sophistication. A wealthy host would compete with peers by presenting ever more elaborate creations, turning a simple meal into an artistic exhibition. For the elite, even simpler snacks were elevated through presentation and exotic ingredients. Spiced pastries, sugar-coated fruits, and candied nuts were commonplace, reflecting both the host's wealth and the global trade networks of the time. Spices such as cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove were imported from Asia at great cost, and their presence in small treats was a clear marker of status. Small meat pies for the elite were also more refined than their street counterparts. They were filled with the finest cuts of meat, seasoned with expensive spices, and sometimes paired with sweet elements like fruit or sugar. The result was a savory sweet snack, eaten in small bites to complement a larger banquet. Interestingly, the elite also enjoyed sweetened breads, honeyed pastries, and marzipan not only for flavor, but for symbolism and entertainment. At festive occasions, such as weddings or religious holidays, these treats were shaped into religious symbols, animals, or mythical creatures, serving as conversation pieces and displays of wealth. Guests would marvel at the skill and artistry, sometimes saving the pieces as keepsakes rather than consuming them immediately. Imagine a banquet in the hall of a noble manor. Guests recline on benches, clad in fine garments, as trays of marzipan birds glide past. Entremets shaped like miniature ships release aromatic steam, while candied fruits glisten under the candlelight. The air is filled with conversation, laughter, and the faint clinking of goblets. Every bite, every morsel, is a performance, a reflection of power, and a taste of indulgence. Even beverages were elevated. Fine wines, spiced Alesh, and imported cordials accompanied these snacks, enhancing flavors and further distinguishing the elite from the common folk. Unlike street food, which emphasized convenience, these treats were meant to be savored slowly, often accompanied by storytelling, music, or theatrical displays. The consumption of such snacks also served political and social functions. A lavish presentation could impress visiting nobles, forge alliances, or demonstrate loyalty to a monarch. Food was a form of communication, signaling wealth, taste, and sophistication without words. It is fascinating to contrast the elite's junk food with that of the common people, where street pies and fried fish were practical, nourishing, and functional. The snacks of the wealthy were artistic, symbolic, and indulgent. Yet in both cases, food fulfilled a crucial human need, not just for calories, but for pleasure, social connection, and identity. The luxurious snacks of the elite remind us that, even in the Middle Ages, people sought joy, novelty, and creativity in what they ate. From the simplest marzipan bird to the most elaborate entree met, every snack tells a story about society, culture, and the enduring human desire for indulgence. By understanding these lavish treats, we see the medieval world as a dynamic spectrum of culinary experiences, from the practical pies of the streets to the fantastical snacks of noble halls. Both reveal a society that, despite hardships and scarcity, celebrated food as pleasure, creativity, and social currency. If we think of medieval junk food today, we often imagine pies, pastries, and roasted meats. But a closer look at the ingredients used reveals a world both fascinating and sometimes startling to modern eyes. Medieval cooks, constrained by scarcity, seasonality, and preservation challenges, often turn to ingredients that might seem unusual or even unappetizing today. Yet for them, these foods were practical, flavorful, and culturally meaningful. Take, for example, offal pies. These pies were filled not with prime cuts of meat, but with hearts, livers, kidneys, and other organs. In a time when no part of an animal could go to waste, offal was both economical and nutritious. Properly spiced and baked within a sturdy crust, these pies were surprisingly flavorful. In fact, some contemporary accounts suggest that offal pies were considered delicacies in certain regions. Blood sausages were another staple, particularly in Northern Europe. Known as black puddings or blood puddings, these sausages combine blood, fat, grains, and spices, creating a rich, protein-packed snack. They were eaten by all social classes, though the quality and seasoning varied according to wealth. The use of blood might shock modern eaters, but for medieval people, it was a practical and respected method of using every part of the animal. Fish was equally prominent, especially in coastal regions and during religious observances that forbade meat. Preserved fish, salted or smoked, became a portable and long-lasting snack. Herring, eels, and cod were commonly sold by street vendors, sometimes fried, sometimes simply salted and eaten with bread. Even inland towns imported dried or salted fish from the coast, reflecting a complex trade network that brought exotic flavors into everyday life. Herbs and spices were essential in medieval snacks. Pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and saffron were used liberally in pies, meats, and pastries, not only for flavor, but also for preservation and social signaling. The presence of these imported spices in a simple meat pie could indicate wealth or status. Even humble street pies might be enhanced with a touch of pepper or a sprinkle of parsley, elevating ordinary food into something flavorful and satisfying. Honey and dried fruits were common in sweets, but they also appeared in savory snacks. Meat pies might include raisins or currants, and sauces could combine vinegar, wine, and sugar. This sweet and savory combination was a hallmark of medieval taste, different from modern palates, but widely appreciated at the time. Eggs and dairy products also featured prominently. Custards, cheese tarts, and small baked pies combined these ingredients for nutritional and culinary variety. The use of eggs, milk, and cheese was often seasonal and tied to local production, reflecting the rhythms of medieval life. Even a humble pie crust played a surprising role. In many recipes, the crust, called a coffin, was intended more as a cooking container than an edible treat. Sometimes it was discarded, sometimes eaten, but its primary purpose was to protect and preserve the filling. This practical approach allowed pies to be transported, sold on the streets, and eaten hours later without spoiling. The medieval approach to food, including junk food, was shaped by necessity, creativity, and cultural norms. While modern diners might recoil at blood sausages, offal pies, or heavily spiced pastries, these ingredients represented resourcefulness, flavor, and efficiency in a society without refrigeration or modern preservation methods. Imagine a medieval cookshop in a market square. The baker rolls out dough, while the smell of roasting meats and baking pies fills the air. A vendor nearby stirs a pot of blood pudding, seasoning it with pepper and herbs. Street children peek through the window, eager for a taste of a warm meat pie, while a wealthy patron selects a spiced offal tart as a mid-morning snack. Each ingredient, each dish, tells a story of economy, taste, and ingenuity. Even more exotic ingredients occasionally appeared in the kitchens of the elite. Spices from Asia, sugar from Arab traders, and rare imported fruits created snacks that dazzled both the palate and the eyes. Meanwhile, the urban poor relied on local and seasonal ingredients, showing that medieval junk food was as diverse as the society itself. By understanding these surprising ingredients, we gain insight into the inventiveness and adaptability of medieval cooks. They transformed what we might consider odd or unappetizing into satisfying, nourishing, and sometimes even indulgent snacks. It's a world where flavor, function, and creativity intersected, creating a culinary tradition that was both practical and fascinating. The medieval world was far from uniform. What people ate and how they prepared it depended heavily on geography, climate, trade, and local culture. Just as today, regional tastes shaped what we might call junk food, creating distinct flavors, ingredients, and traditions across Europe. England, pies, ale, and coarse bread. In England, particularly in urban centers like London, the staples of medieval life were pies, ale, and bread. Meat pies and pasties were ubiquitous, often filled with pork, beef, or offal, and seasoned with imported spices when affordable. Street vendors sold them hot and portable, perfect for laborers or travelers. Fish was also crucial, especially along the coast or during religious observances forbidding meat. Herring, cod, and eels were salted or smoked and sold as inexpensive snacks. Bread came in many forms: white loaves for the wealthy, coarse rye or barley loaves for the poor, and horse bread in times of famine. Alehouses were abundant, offering cheap meals and social gathering spaces. Here, the working class found sustenance, company, and a brief respite from labor. The combination of bread, pies, and ale defined much of English urban food culture. France, sweet pastries and festive treats. In France, the emphasis leaned more toward refinement and sweet indulgence. Street markets and fairs featured gingerbread, honeyed pastries, and small cakes, while noble households experimented with entremet and decorative confections. French recipes often blended sweet and savory flavors, combining meat with fruit, spices, and sugar. Regional specialties like tarts filled with almonds, raisins, or curd delighted the palate. Festivals and religious holidays provided opportunities for townspeople to enjoy special treats, from candied nuts to elaborate honey cakes. Paris, a major hub of trade and culture, saw a rich exchange of ingredients, including spices from the East, sugar from Arab traders, and fruit from the Mediterranean. Here, medieval snacks were as much about art and presentation as they were about sustenance. Italy, marzipan and candied delights. In Italy, particularly in the city-states like Florence and Venice, sweets were highly prized. Marzipan, candied fruits, and almond confections were common street treats, as well as delicacies served at feasts. Venice, a trading powerhouse, brought in exotic spices, sugar, and dried fruits, allowing cooks to craft snacks that were both flavorful and visually stunning. Italian confections often reflected the wealth of cities, with elaborate presentation and careful attention to taste. Even simple street snacks could carry a hint of sophistication. Germany, sausages, pretzels, and honeyed cakes. Germany's contribution to medieval junk food was hearty and practical. Sausages, blood puddings, and pretzels were commonly sold on the streets, alongside honey cakes and spiced breads during fairs. Pretzels were particularly symbolic, shaped to represent crossed arms in prayer. Street vendors sold them year-round, and they were especially popular with children. Sausages, made from pork, blood, and grains, were filling, inexpensive, and portable, a practical snack for workers and travelers alike. Spain, nuts, dried fruits, and spiced pastries. In Spain, medieval snacks reflected the influence of Moorish cuisine, with a focus on nuts, dried fruits, honey, and spices like cinnamon and saffron. Almonds, raisins, and figs were often incorporated into pastries or eaten as snacks during festivals. Street vendors sold sweet pastries flavored with orange blossom or spiced with clove and ginger. These treats were both affordable for the working class and indulgent for the wealthy, demonstrating a blending of cultural influences. Across all regions, we see a shared pattern. Snacks were portable, flavorful, and often tied to social and religious practices. The ingredients and methods varied, reflecting local resources, climate, and trade connections, but the purpose was universal: to nourish, satisfy cravings, and sometimes delight the senses. Imagine a medieval traveler moving across Europe. In England, they bite into a hearty meat pie washed down with ale. In France, they nibble on a honeyed tart while wandering a bustling market. In Italy, a candied almond or marzipan bird tempts their palate. In Germany, they enjoy a pretzel or sausage, hearty and warm. In Spain, sweet pastries with nuts and dried fruits provide a festive treat. Each region offers a distinct taste of medieval life, yet all are united by practicality, flavor, and ingenuity. By examining these regional differences, we see that medieval junk food was far from monolithic. It was a reflection of local resources, trade networks, and cultural tastes, showing that even in a world without modern fast food chains, culinary diversity thrived. As we come to the end of our journey through medieval food, it becomes clear that what we might casually call junk food played an essential and fascinating role in everyday life. From the bustling streets of London to the grand halls of Paris and Florence, from savory pies and sausages to honeyed pastries and marzipan creations, food in the Middle Ages was more than sustenance. It was culture, survival, and pleasure. Consider the street vendor selling a meat pie in a crowded market square. For a laborer, this pie was a quick, portable meal, providing calories and protein during a long day of hard work. For a child, a slice of sweetened bread or a pretzel offered joy and indulgence in a world often defined by scarcity. Even the simplest ingredients, flour, honey, or offal, were transformed into something flavorful, practical, and socially significant. Now imagine the noble feasts, with a wealthy delighted in entremet, spiced pastries, and decorative marzipan. These snacks were as much about art, social signaling, and entertainment as they were about taste. The careful use of exotic spices, sugar, and rare ingredients reflected global trade, wealth, and sophistication, offering a stark contrast to the street foods of the poor. What we see then is a spectrum of medieval snacking: practical and hearty for the urban poor, often functional and portable; festive and indulgent for the wealthy; artistic and socially symbolic. Yet despite these differences, all these foods were united by a common human impulse: the desire for nourishment, flavor, and enjoyment. In many ways, medieval junk food shares a direct lineage with the snacks we enjoy today. Quick bites, savory indulgences, sweet treats, and comfort foods designed to delight the senses. Reflecting on the medieval experience also gives us insight into how food connects society. Street vendors were not only purveyors of pies and pastries. They were social hubs, newsbearers, and witnesses to daily life. Taverns provided nourishment alongside social connection, while noble banquets communicated power and sophistication. Every meal, snack, or treat was embedded in a web of culture, economy, and human interaction. Even the surprising ingredients, the blood in puddings, the offal in pies, the exotic spices in sweet pastries, tell stories of resourcefulness, creativity, and survival. Medieval cooks knew how to maximize flavor, use what was available, and create foods that could satisfy both the body and the spirit. Now, if we walk through a modern city, we can see echoes of this medieval world. The busy street vendors selling hot dogs or meat pies mirrors the cookshop of London in 1300. Pastry shops and candy stalls reflect the delights of gingerbread fairs and marzipan artisans. Even fast food restaurants echo the medieval desire for quick, satisfying, and portable meals. The human appetite for snackable indulgence is timeless. So next time you bite into a pastry, fry, or meat pie, imagine the hands that crafted similar foods centuries ago. Imagine the smells, the bustling streets, the laughter of children, the clinking of mugs in a tavern, or the awe of a guest at a noble banquet. Medieval junk food was more than survival. It was pleasure, ingenuity, and culture. As we leave this world behind, one thing is clear. Our love for snacks, indulgence, and convenience is nothing new. The Middle Ages may have been a distant world, but the cravings, creativity, and social joys of eating connect us across centuries. In essence, medieval junk food teaches us that food is never just food. It is culture, art, survival, and joy, an enduring story of humanity, one bite at a time. And so, whether it's a street sausage, a gingerbread figure, or a lavish marzipan entremet, every medieval snack invites us to taste history, feel the culture, and savor the story. As the smoke of roasting meat drifts from medieval streets and the aroma of honeyed pastries fills the air, we leave behind a world both distant and familiar. From humble pies and hearty breads to marzipan birds and spice pastries, medieval junk food was more than nourishment. It was survival, creativity, and culture all at once. Every bite tells a story of bustling markets, lively taverns, festive fairs, and noble banquets. It speaks of a society that valued flavor, ingenuity, and social connection, even amid scarcity. And those centuries separate us from these cooks and vendors. The human desire for pleasure, convenience, and indulgence remains unchanged. Today, when we grab a pastry, savor a sausage, or enjoy a sweet treat, we continue a tradition stretching back centuries. The snacks we eat may be faster, flashier, or more processed, but the impulse is the same: to nourish, delight, and connect. Medieval junk food reminds us that food is never just food. It is history, artistry, survival, and joy. Every loaf, pie, sausage, or sweet is a story, one that continues with each bite we take today.